Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the new album from the Gorillaz, the Now Now. The follow-up to last year's Humans. It's been a little over a year at this point since that project dropped, and that album was one that was definitely a bit controversial, I guess you could say, in the Gorillaz fan base. Some people really liked it, some people hated it, some people thought it was just kind of average. Overall, I thought it was a decent project. I didn't like it nearly as much as, Demon Days or Plastic Beach, for example, but I still thought it was pretty decent. It had some good cuts on it, but still, I felt like its greatest problem was that it just really didn't feel all that much like a Gorillaz album. It felt a lot more like a compilation made with artists that Damon Albarn happened to like and just kind of put together and, occasionally featured himself on. It didn't really come off like a real band was making it like those earlier Gorillaz projects felt. So coming into this project here, I was a bit interested to see what the Gorillaz were going to do, especially considering that the track listing, when that was revealed, and we found out that it had, barely any features on it. I was very happy to see that, because, there was no way that this project wasn't going to, feel more like a real band, and that it was going to feel like a collection of songs from different artists. That was just impossible, given the lack of features on this thing. So overall, what did we get with the Now Now? Well, overall, I think this project is kind of reminiscent of The Fall, the Gorillaz album that was released following Plastic Beach. Kind of a forgotten album in the Gorillaz discography, and kind of understandably so, considering it's just kind of this very minimalistic at times project that feels almost more like a Damon Albarn or 2D solo album than it does a full Gorillaz experience. It's my least favorite Gorillaz album. I don't hate it or anything, but I just don't care for it all that much, honestly. But this project reminds me of that one, and a little bit of Humans as well. Like, not necessarily the crazy amount of features, but more so like the production, the instrumentals, and even, like 2D's vocal parts. This project kind of feels like a nice, little marriage between those two aspects of Gorillaz. Yet I also feel like it manages to be stronger than either of those were on their own. I feel like this is definitely a better project than Humans, certainly a better project than The Fall, and overall just a pretty enjoyable album in my opinion. It's not really blowing me away, this album. It's not, it's not going to be considered a classic in a few years or anything like that, but I still think it's a pretty good album through and through. This project definitely has that very stripped back, more minimalistic sound that was present on The Fall. However, like I said, instrumentally, it sounds a lot more similar to Humans at times, considering a lot of the instrumentals on this thing have a more electronic feel to them, a lot of funk influence as well that we're getting on here. Not really so much guitars or anything that's more rock-driven, but still, I feel like it manages to work. I really like how funky some of these instrumentals can get at times, particularly with some of their bass work that's being done here. Now, no longer by former bassist Murdoch, in the virtual band that is. I do understand that they're a virtual band. Murdoch isn't actually real. But, he's been replaced by Ace, who's apparently a character from the Powerpuff Girls, which I'm not really familiar with myself, but apparently that's what he's from. And apparently he's playing bass on this album now, and I guess he's a good replacement for Murdoch on here. I like some of his bass work on here, particularly on tracks like Hollywood and Kansas. I just really like some of the bass lines that come in on this project. I feel like overall they're some of the most memorable moments on this thing. Like I said before, there's also some more electronic influences similar to that of Humans at times in terms of the production on here. Nothing that's super, just overwhelmingly electronic or synthetic. But at the same time, there's not really all that much guitars that we're getting on here. And that kind of leads me into one of my first complaints with this project. Not a super big one in the grand scheme of things, but I do really, kind of dislike how this project kind of feels like Noodle and Russell, could just kind of be taken out of the equation, and, it still would make sense to some extent. There are some guitars that do pop up on this thing. I'll talk about those in a moment, but really at times it feels more like Noodle is like a featured artist on this thing more than like, an actual member of this band. And Russell, of course, there is percussion on this album, of course, but I feel like much of it could have been done synthetically with like a drum machine or something like that rather than like an actual drummer. I had a similar complaint with Humans, though that album was more so it felt like it was really just 2D and a bunch of featured artists. Here, at least, I could say it's 2D, Ace, occasionally Noodle and maybe Russell as well. I just kind of feel like I'm still missing kind of that band feel that the Gorillaz still managed to have earlier in their career, despite not actually being a real band. As for those guitars, when they do manage to pop up, they do, they have mixed results, honestly. For example, on the closing track on here, Soak, I believe that's how it's pronounced. I feel like it does a good job. It really adds to this track and makes it one of my favorites in the track listing. But on the other hand, there's the track Idaho, which just really sticks out on this album as not really fitting in with much of the rest of the project. It has more of a natural, organic feel to it, which isn't something that's necessarily a bad thing, but it kind of stands out from the rest of these tracks as not really fitting in as well compared to much of the rest of the songs on here. This album is a very consistent one in terms of the sound that it gives you. It flows very nicely, it has a consistent sound to it, except for Idaho. Idaho's the only one that really stands out. And it's not an awful track in its own right. I mean, I wasn't crazy about it when I first heard it, but with, repeated listens, I have warmed up to the track more than, what I initially felt when I heard it. It still probably is one of my least favorites in the track listing, but it is a decent song in its own right, yet it just feels really out of place in here compared to some of the other tracks. And, I know I was just talking about earlier how I wish there were more guitars on this thing, so, why am I complaining when the guitars actually show up? Well, really, it's just that I feel like the guitars need to be used, consistently here on this project. I mean, occasionally they'll work if they're used sparingly, but sometimes it could also lead to tracks like Idaho, where it really just kind of feels out of place, just the more natural feel of it. It doesn't really fit in with the rest of the track listing as much as, the more electronic elements, the funkier bass, all that stuff is really consistently displayed throughout this project. The guitars, not so much, though. Kind of a minor complaint, though, given that I do really like a lot of the rest of this project and what it just does in its own right. Another kind of small complaint about this project is that I do feel like some of the tracks on here are a little bit insignificant in the grand scheme of things, or don't feel as important, particularly the track Trans and the track 1%. These are shorter tracks in the track listing. One comes towards the beginning and one comes towards the end of the album. And just, in the grand scheme of things, I don't really feel like they add all too much to the project. They're not awful tracks in their own right, they're just a bit more forgettable in the grand scheme of things, honestly. At least that's just how I feel personally. But, the rest of this project manages to be pretty entertaining from front to back, with the exception of those few more forgettable tracks, as well as, maybe the awkwardly placed Idaho. I really enjoy much of the rest of the songs on this album. The album starts off with Humility, one of the singles that we got from this thing, and I do really enjoy this track. I love how just carefree it sounds. It has a sort of upbeat feel to it that could be described for, a good few tracks on here. There are some tracks on here that also feel a bit more melancholy, but it's kind of that, typical, Gorillaz 2D vocal sort of vibe that you get from this thing. At times he can sound a bit carefree and upbeat, like on Humility, but many times he also sounds very sad as well. But back to Humility, I do really enjoy that track. I think it's a good start to the album. It introduces a lot of the sound of the album right at the start, because this whole album really does carry that very upbeat, sort of laid-back, summertime feel that I do personally enjoy. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea necessarily, but I do happen to enjoy it. Another track I really enjoy on here is Hollywood. This is one of the tracks that also has some features on it. One of the ones I was most excited to see was Snoop Dogg, considering he has, featured on Gorillaz albums before. On Plastic Beach, I happen to like his feature on that album as well. So I was excited to see what he was going to do on Hollywood here. And I think he happened to do a pretty good job. I mean, the quality of his features in modern times is very hit or miss, but, this one here is a hit. And I think just the very laid-back summertime feel of this album works very nicely to Snoop Dogg's advantage, considering that he also has a very laid-back feel in his flow and his delivery. It just works very nicely in my opinion. And I do also like Jamie Principal's contributions to this track as well. I don't want to make it sound like I dislike his parts on this track either. I just feel like this track, it's a track with some features on it, but the features don't really feel overwhelming. I also really love 2D's chorus on this track, the funky bass that I mentioned earlier. It's easily one of my favorites in the track listing. Lake Zurich is another track on here that I was initially not too hot on when I first heard it as a single, but hearing it in the context of this album, I enjoy it a lot more. I think it flows nicely with the rest of the project, and it just overall maintains a lot of the feel that this project has going for it. It just, delivers a very solid track. I don't think it's out of this world or outstanding or anything, but it's pretty solid in my own opinion. Overall, I feel that this project is one that definitely has that very laid-back summertime mood to it. And I feel like that's something that, some people may very like, myself included. I happen to enjoy a lot of, summertime sounding music. But I feel at the same time this is a thing about this album that might turn a lot of people away from it. Because if you don't like that very laid-back, summertimey feeling that this project has going for it, you're probably going to hate this project, because that's really what a lot of these tracks are going for. Also, if you're someone who likes it when the Gorillaz have a lot of hip-hop influence into their music, like on Humans or Plastic Beach, you might be disappointed with this project as well, because really Hollywood is the only track on here that, you'll probably enjoy. So overall, this is an album that I think is pretty solid, like I said before. I don't think it's outstanding, I don't think it's one of the Gorillaz' best, but at the same time, I think it's better than Humans in the fall. Honestly, I feel like this album definitely rivals their debut album in terms of quality, at least in my own opinion. And, in part that is because I'm not as big a fan of their debut album as lots of people are, but I still feel like this is a solid project worth your time if you're a Gorillaz fan, particularly if you were a bit dissatisfied with Humans because you felt like there wasn't enough 2D in the rest of the band on there. Like I said, this project still is lacking some of the band feel to it, but you definitely get more 2D on here, which is something I like. And it just feels a lot more cohesive, this project. It feels like an album. Humans just felt like a collection of tracks for the most part. Here, it just gets right to the point and gives you an album, really. And I do also feel like this is what the fall should have been to some extent, because this album, rather, it has that, very stripped back feel to it. It has a lot of focus on 2D. The album artwork has 2D on it. It is pretty much what the fall was supposed to be, I feel. Because I feel like that album was just very, while it was stripped back also and it had a great focus on 2D also, it also just felt really unimportant. And that's just not my own personal opinion on it. The band themselves, or, whoever is working behind Gorillaz, Damon Albarn, whoever it is, also just don't really treat the fall with all that much, importance. This album, I do feel, is a bit more important. It has music videos tied to it. It has an aesthetic tied to it as well. It's just a lot more entertaining of a project, a lot more satisfying listen than the fall was. Overall, this is a solid project, like I said before. I like what they were going for here. I do think that there are a few moments in the track list where things maybe aren't quite as good as they could have been, maybe a few missteps here or there, but it's a solid listen through and through. And if you're a Gorillaz fan, you need to check it out, because, you may enjoy it. And with that said, that is just my own personal opinion, my own personal take on this project. Feel free to have your own. In fact, feel free to leave it in the comment section down below. Did you love this project? Did you hate it? Did you feel indifferent to it? Did you like Humans more? Whatever your opinion may be, leave it down in the comment section. I greatly appreciate seeing it. And while you're down there, also make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. In fact, I'm actually planning on doing a Gorillaz albums ranking video at some point in the future, now that we have this project. I do have some other lists I'm currently working on, but, once those are out of the way, the Gorillaz, ranked video is going to be happening. So if you're a Gorillaz fan, you want to hear my thoughts on, how I would, rank this album in relation to all the others, I know I did talk about it to some extent here in this video, but that video is going to have all the details in it, so make sure you subscribe to not miss out on that video. Thank you for watching, and stay golden.